All right, I am pumped to be joined as we are here every single week by the Hall of Famer, John Smoltz. John, trade deadline week. Big week, crazy week in the game of baseball, as always. But this trade deadline just felt weird and, and a little bit different. But pumped to have you on.
Yeah, no doubt. 27 teams, I think, yesterday did something. Three teams did not. I think it's a quantity versus quality. That doesn't mean, some of the bigger names probably didn't go that we expected, but I think for me, my head's swimming. I mean,
Yeah.
I got to look at a whole different set of players now for a lot of teams because there's so much movement.
If you had to go right now and call a Miami Marlins game, would you? How would you do with that roster?
Yeah, it'd be a lot of work. I'd be investigating a lot of new players. Look, every year we find that the same kind of teams are doing the same kind of things, which really needs to change. Like the Miami Marlins. I mean, come on. All right. At some point, they've got to put together a franchise and a team that doesn't keep restocking,
Yeah.
and I think at some point that's got to change. And for the other teams in the league, we always know that the Oakland A's got to change, and hopefully a new stadium's going to do that. But we've got to be able to stop having certain teams be farm system teams for the big boys. And
Yeah.
that's why I was glad to see about 27 teams get involved and make some changes.
Yeah, I talked about it in my last show with the Marlins. I do think they did well. I think they got a good haul, but it is always this same thing, rinse and repeat. And we got good prospects when you traded away Christian Yelich and Giancarlo Stanton and Marcelo Zuna and all of those guys leave, and it's the same thing, rinse and repeat. And now this year, they're a staple piece in that organization, an exciting guy that do they want on their team long term? Jazz Chisholm. Now he's gone to the Yankees doing big things. So it's like, at what point do these great returns not matter? Because whenever they become anything, you're just going to trade them away anyway.
Yeah, that's the narrative that has to change. Look, I think this year's start to their season changed everything. They were supposed to be pretty good, and they got up to a horrible start. So we'll see. And I hope that even if they did this one last time, that they could build a fan base that can gain some traction towards winning baseball again.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely I think they did well. I think they got great returns. I think they are a winner of the deadline. But if I were to ask you, and this is a tough question just a couple days after the deadline, but if you were to pick one trade deadline winner, if I say, John, who won the trade deadline, who are you saying?
I'm going Baltimore. I think Baltimore addressed every need, and they did it with a lot. I mean, they added relievers, they added a starter, they added a power hitter. I think Baltimore, and it's encouraging. If I'm a Baltimore Oriole fan, I'm like, yes. I mean, yeah, we had a lot of talent, but how much is that talent going to actually always play out? We're in the mix now, and they now have solidified themselves. I thought they were the favorite in the beginning of the year. It's actually the two biggest teams in that division, and you can add Boston, but they're not in position to win the division yet. They're in the mix. The teams that are in the division, thick of things, they made two big splashes, but I thought Baltimore had the quantity. I thought they did everything they had to do, and there's some big arms now in the bullpen, and they're going to mix and match now with the Yankees and the East the rest of the way.
How did you feel about that trade? It got a lot of talk and a lot of traction. They trade for a pitcher, a starting lefty in Trevor Rogers that doesn't have great numbers on the surface. About a 4.9 ERA, and they gave up some pretty big prospects to get him in Stowers and Norby. When you saw that trade come through for what they gave up, what were your thoughts there?
I thought that they maximized the opportunity that left field is 380 feet. And you got a left handed pitcher that is now going to benefit from 380 feet.
Yeah.
You also have a pitcher that probably didn't get a lot of run support where he was and was probably, I know there's all kinds of metrics out there that show you're pitching better and you're hitting better than you actually are. So maybe that was part of the DNA, but they needed arms.
Yeah.
And for them to get to the end of the season, they had to get arms because they were really trying to pull off miracles and expending their bullpen at an alarming rate. So listen, I mean, nobody's immune from the injuries, but they did everything you had to do to equip their team for this. This is not just to win the division, get in the playoffs. They did that last year. They've checked that box. They
Yeah.
want to go to the World Series. And to go to the World Series, I'm sure they tried everything they could with the Tigers and maybe school, but they got the next best thing in my mind from what their team needed to the energy that team is now going to ride on. And I just think you're going to have a two-man race, in the East for the division.
Yeah.
But more importantly, they feel like they've got what it takes now.
Yeah, I thought Eflin was huge for them as well, and they didn't give up a ton to get him. So now in the playoffs, you can throw out Corbin Burns, Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, have Trevor Rogers for lefties to come out and get you a couple innings out of the bullpen. I think they really helped their rotation a lot.
I think if you think those guys have better pitchability, by the way, if they're better than what their record is, think about how much better that team's going to be, right? If
Yeah.
they're struggling and you don't have to give up a ton to give them, and they know they can progress, I think they win the trade deadline, in my opinion.
Well, on the contrary of that, if I were to ask you, biggest loser in your opinion, who lost the trade deadline in your mind? Where are you going there?
Yeah, that's such a tough question, only because I know the conversation is going to come up about the Braves not getting, maybe not doing a lot. Braves are in a tough spot. They really are. They've got a ton of injuries. They really, I mean, they went and got some reunion players that have been there before and helped them. I think again, I think the two. It's tough to say who lost it when everybody did something. It's the bottom. The bottom line is we talked about Milwaukee. We talked about the pressure on Milwaukee to do something. They did something. I'm actually pretty surprised. They've strengthened their lead. Pittsburgh, again, I look at Kansas City and doing the under the radar stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh, I would have loved to see do a little more. I would have loved to see them kind of show the fan base. But here's the bottom line on what teams are deciding. If we can squeak in this year, next year's really our year, right? You got to make that assessment. Each general manager has got to assess, can we squeak in this year, gain some experience, and really benefit for next year? But the question's a great one. I think Cleveland didn't do much. I don't think they had the ability to do much. Minnesota didn't do much, but the Central kind of in the American League was kind of bland.
Yeah.
There really wasn't a ton of moves. I think all the action was with the big boys, and they kind of stole the attention. So those fringe teams that you're talking about probably would have to fall to Pittsburgh maybe a little bit. But
Yeah.
it's just to lose the trade deadline. That means you were supposed to go for it. And I don't know how many teams legitimately could say they could go for it that didn't do something, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it'll shake out one way. In the next week, it's going to shake out.
I don't know if you know a ton about the prospects going to the Blue Jays, but I want to ask you about the Astros deadline because their trade deadline got a lot of conversation, I'd say, between getting Kikuchi for the rotation, but giving up, in Astros fans' opinion, a lot to do it, not addressing the first base situation. So, as a whole, how do you think Dana Brown and the Astros did at the deadline?
Well, I thought they got a great left-handed pitcher that's going to help them. Now see again, when I look at trades and if everything goes perfect, you got to bank on some of your guys coming back. When there's some injuries that they're sustained in their rotation, they got to know, okay, this guy's coming back here.
Yeah.
When we get these guys back, look at what the rotation looks like when everyone's healthy. Then assess the trade. if you've got Vettis and Kikuchi and Verlander, and now all of a sudden you start getting some of those other guys back. Hunter Brown's been on a pretty good roll to his last start. Now you start looking at a champion pedigree that is legitimate, a contender again to get back. And so I think when you give up a prospect like that, you got to look at, well, where are my stars? Where's that guy going to play? And am I good enough for the next 2 to 3 years without him?
Yeah.
And I think that's what they look at, because the Houston Astros narrative is not the Pittsburgh Pirates narrative. It's not building something. It's already there. And they know that they might have what, 2 more years of this kind of sustainability. And yeah, then you always look down the road. But how many, again, when we make these trades and we talk about them, I don't know the narrative that the Washington Nationals won the Soto trade at the time. I don't remember that being the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But now you could say the Washington Nationals may have won the Soto trade. So it's always the chicken and the egg. I get it.
Yeah. So of everything that happened, John, every trade from, the last week or so around the game, what in your mind sticks out as the most impactful trade that was made? The one that you look at and say, man, that team did great. This one is going to be the most impactful down the stretch.
Yeah. And again, another incredible, tough question. My first reaction, just because of the impact right away, Jazz Chisholm.
That's my answer.
I just think if there's one thing the Yankees needed, they needed some energy, some speed. They needed somebody in that lineup that was going to create chaos besides Soto and Judge. And you can't ask for better timing. You couldn't ask for a better personality for the New York Yankees. Now that takes their lineup back to, how are you going to get through it? And now maybe 6-7 runs. I think they went through their stretch. Their pitching got not normal, went way below normal. They were pitching way above their head, and then they went way too far the other way. Now the balance of scales are coming back. And the New York Yankees, I'm telling you, this couldn't have been a better timing for them. And where the narrative was going so negative, it's now turned right back around. The scales have flipped.
Yeah, I thought they did great with him. I said it, the second that signing happened, I knew some people wouldn't love it. Some people think he's too flashy. Some people think he's not a great fit. I love watching him. I love the energy he brings. And what I said, to be honest, I know the Yankees have the best 1-2 punch in a lineup in baseball, but the Yankees for a few years have just been boring. Like they just haven't been the team that has excitement. And I think Jazz Chisholm brings them that. And this was before he hit 4 homers in his first 3 games, which was the first Yankee to ever do that. I love the addition of him for what he brings on the field offensively, what he brings his versatility on defense, and the personality that I think that lineup and locker room desperately needed.
Yeah, and that's why I talk about the East is going to be so much fun between the 3 teams. Boston has proven they can score, they can hit, they got that dynamic you're talking about, but now all of a sudden the New York Yankees can claim a little bit of that too. So you're right. They were not, last year they were station to station. They've improved offensively in every category you can improve, and now that's only makes them better.
John, I know trade deadline, tough to put you on the spot and say winner, loser, most impactful, but always appreciate your time, and this was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, it is going to be a fun ending to the season. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it is. A couple months left, so we'll see what happens. Until next week, my friend, thank you.
You got it.
All right, well, just wanted to thank John Smoltz again for joining us here on Flippin' Bats. Always a lot of fun being joined by the Hall of Famer every week. Every week, get to be joined by the Hall of Famer John Smoltz. This week, trade deadline week, I have done a lot of talking about it. Had a pre-trade deadline episode, but if you haven't listened to the post-trade deadline episode, my top 3 winners, my top 3 losers, boy, did I go off on the top 3 losers. My most impactful trade. So go check out my most recent episode that came out Tuesday or Wednesday right after the trade deadline. So appreciate you all for listening. Thought Smoltz made a really interesting point when he said Well, you see, the Pirates and the Astros are in two different places. The Pirates need, the Pirates are building for the future. The Astros are in the midst of this and have obviously gone to 7 straight ALCSs, and their goals are just a little bit different. The Astros went and improved, though I did think they gave up a lot to do it. And certainly talked about that and Dana Brown in Wednesday's episode. So go listen to that. Thanks again to John Smoltz for joining. Thank you all, as always, for listening and watching, whether you're listening on podcast, watching on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that follow button, Apple, Spotify, wherever. Also, our YouTube channel at Flippin Bats Pod. You can watch everything there. We're on all social media as well, putting out some cool clips and stuff at Flippin Bats Pod. So really appreciate you all for listening. And until next week, my friends, remember, find your bat and flip it.